So as ShakaRa has already, is giving me a very elaborate introduction. There's not much I don't think I can add to it. But just to kind of reiterate some of the points, Ancestral Voices is a life's work developed by myself and my wife, Verona, that came out of realizing that as African people, or even descendants of African people, we do not, apart from, should we say, the social stigmatization that goes on, it all really delves at the very root to the fact that the first, I guess, system to take us from our very source came from our culture. Because, we can make a direct correlation with the fact that, and I'm not saying that we should be like Indians or Chinese, the fact that they still were left with access to certain parts of their cultural heritage, it gives them that glue that as a result we can see with the way they're able to, move forward even with their differences. Because, an Indian will still tell you some stuff about a Pakistani or a Bangladeshi or a Sri Lankan, but they can still work together and function. Whereas sometimes, often, we get drawn into African American, West Indian or African, we have these back and forth, negative commentary about ourselves. So we started off with, you can see the green one there, the first film, which is Ancestral Voices, which I'm glad we've had some that have already seen it, because we use that to open a conversation, through comparative analysis to check that if all these ideas we find in religious or spiritual systems are so similar, then on what basis do we say one is devil worship and the other is somehow God's personal favorite? So that's the green one. Then, with that release, we kept getting a lot of inquiries about, okay, so you've deconstructed this myth. What do I do now? I don't go to church, I can't go to the mosque. How do I practice? How do I actually develop this relationship with the divine mysteries? So we came out with Rituals for Living, which is a segment taken from the upcoming film, which will be released the summer of this year. And that deals with a various range of practices, both for initiates and those who are not initiated. Things that you can do in the morning. You give thanks for waking up healthy, strong, how to move about your business. So there's a range of rituals from the Dagara to the Vodun to the Zulu that anyone really can implement in their own daily life. That's a digital upload, so it's only available on Vimeo. We don't actually have a, should we say, a physical hard copy. Then the brown one is what's upcoming. This is Ancestral Voices, Spirit is Eternal, where we've carried out over 5 years a systematic exploration of what African spiritual systems entails, the philosophies as well as the practices that it promotes. So we first came out with a book which is available now, because in a film, we have over 12 hours of interviews. We can't make a film that long. So due to the editing process, we have to cut it down to maximum 2 hours. So the knowledge that we've taken out of the film, we've compiled it into a book, so that, because that's what we did the research for, it's not for us to keep that information, it's to be able to make it available. And I'm glad to say that we're getting somewhere, because at the moment, Harvard has taken on the book on board, it's in their library, SOAS as well has, and we're hoping, because that was their point from the beginning, to put this in their educational institutions, because that's where most of the colonization of the mind actually takes place, in those educational spaces. So we need to have ourselves in there. So I'll move on then, and there's a lot of work on, so not much is coming from the mind. I've had to put nearly everything I'll say on the PowerPoint, and being invited to speak at, if you want to call it a very creative event, will be very difficult for me to just be here lecturing to you, get very boring. So I've made an effort. Let's see if it has any impact. So what is this about then, this African spirituality? Is it about money and prosperity, backdoor dealings and get-rich schemes, which are attained via contracts with nefarious beings, aka devil worship, human sacrifice, all the rest of it? Or forcing lovers to stay in a relationship even against their own convictions? Well, sorry to disappoint you, as all these are largely colonial projections, disseminated or disseminated to discourage your engagement and further your confusion, because at the core of the spiritual systems are two very simple notions or ideas. The first of which is self-realization. Do you really know yourself? Because as the Asians say, we have in the Kemetic proverb, man, know thyself. And that's not a gendered thing, it's just man as in humans, people. The second is self-actualization. Do you really know your own personal power? Do you know the full extent of your potential and how to attain that potential? That is African spirituality, because in its very core is that each of us here is here for a reason, a purpose, and that is encapsulated in the fulfillment of a personal divine destiny, which is locked away deep in your ancestral memory. Because as you know, you're not here as a product of, should we say, only some divine spark. You came from a long list of people who over the centuries have come together in unions to produce what we are now eventually. And it provides us with the keys so we can spiritually perceive by connecting us to our ancestors who are in the very makeup of our own DNA. Now, once upon a time, that may have been called superstition, but now modern science is saying exactly the same thing. Yeah, so the Africans weren't should we say, as misguided as the missionaries have led us to believe, because what that in our DNA with particular practices, what we can get is direction, instruction, and protection, things that we need to live our very lives. And the main aim of these practices, what we generally call rituals, as a very general term, is that we can remember that destiny that our own spirit agreed with itself, the Creator, so that we can manifest that destiny in its life. Because one of the, and there are many concepts covered in the book, one of the main concepts is that the Creator, or what we might call God, you're also God. But you need to, should we say, bring that aspect of yourself in fulfillment. Hence why I said self-actualization and self-realization. You need to come into yourself or into your very being. And that is essentially what African spirituality, both the philosophy and the practices, seek to do. To give you the necessary information, or for you to remember the necessary information so you can come into that manifestation. So that's my first presentation. I think I'm a bit short behind the time, so I'll gladly take any questions now. And then also for the second presentation. So feel free. Any questions that anyone would like to ask? Hello.
Hi. I wondered if you could explain or say a bit more about the DNA and about how that's how we can channel the
Okay.
DNA.
No, definitely. So with your DNA, or what we have, first of all, Emory School of Medicine, one Ivy League institution in the United States, did a study in 2013. Russia, I believe, is the University of Science and Technology, also conducted studies. And what they realized is there's certain aspects of your DNA markers that gives you your behavior traits. So if you have something like, you don't understand, but you have a phobia of spiders. Yeah, you don't know why, but you seem to be afraid of spiders. That actually might not be a trait that comes from you personally, it's from an ancestor before. So that fear that you've carried forward is that linkage between you and the ancestor that lived once upon a time. Yes? So this is why within the traditions we have family altars or personal altars, and then you might have the communal shrine that the whole community will go and give reverence to. Yes? So having that altar or that space gives you the opportunity to have a place where you can sit and, be a project thought or ask for that guidance. And in that stillness, you will find, this is what I guess they might call sparks of inspiration. You think of something, all of a sudden, well, they'll say you have a eureka moment, and then you've developed something new. but that thing is not new. It's something that you recall from someone who came before you and, in a sense, has gifted that to you, but then it only exists within your DNA, if we want to speak scientifically. So that is what that link has, and this is what it's now been proven. So I guess it's true. Yeah. Okay. So thank you for that question. Any others, please? Anyone else? Any comments?
Yeah. Well, give thanks. I am Jamaican, a writer myself, poet, teacher by profession.
Okay.
But my calling, or first love, is poetry anyway. What I've been reading for most of my life in terms of the African studies, and I see where some of the things you're just saying there now, it was manifested in a documentary that came out to say that the enslavement of our people,
Yes.
when our people were made into slaves, that has been imprinted on their DNA.
That's right.
The suffering that they had gone through, that now is having a traumatic post-depression syndrome on our people.
Yes.
And with regards to the whole question of the religion, how it has made that imprint on our people, and as a result, our people are suffering from a stagnation or development created through this whole religious aspect of things.
That's right.
And some of them appears as if they are going places in the sense of material things, but in the terms of a natural livity, the way they should be living amongst their own people. You know, there's so much prejudice among our own self against our own people because of probably where we are from, how we speak, how we look, how we dress, and that sort of thing. So it is quite befitting to see you coming here and speaking to us in this fashion. Sometimes they say we are speaking to the converted.
Yes.
In the sense that people who have that desire or that interest will congregate for the information.
That's right.
When the information is actually needed by so many of our people who dress up, whether on a Saturday or on a Sunday or whatever it is, and go to other places where their resources are being siphoned off. And where, say for example, in a situation like this, where even this venue or other venues connected to it are doing things for self, like Saturday schools and those sort of stuff, you know, and sometimes it would appear as if they are not even flourishing, in the sense like, oh, say for example, we put it like a religious institution would be flourishing in the district. I'm from Jamaica, and then Jamaica is said to be one of the countries with the most churches per square mile. And at the same time, you know, what is happening there, and within any little country community, there are so many churches, and even the youths in the community don't have access to some of those places for training and development. And these people in these institutions do not set up skills training center, equipment and all of that, where these youths can go learn stuff. So doing for self and working and speaking about it, it's quite commendable, I would say.
Yeah, no, definitely. And thank you very much for adding that to it, because that is a big debate that we suffer, you know. And the thing is, with you illustrating the point of Jamaica, I can even take it back to be Ghana or Nigeria, you know, where there are all these big, magnificent churches, you know. And as you said, that for instance, it might seem like a Saturday school is not flourishing, but that's because within your own mind, you will compare it to a European institution that has had hundreds of years of funding and establishment. You know, so you forget that this is not about, again, as I said earlier, it's not about power or about the quantity, it's about the usefulness, the substance of what you're receiving there. So, you know, if it's a Saturday school with only 20 children, if all 20 children are doing greatly, and you rather compare it to, like, let's say a school where they only have a 10% pass rate of a GCSE, when you actually look at the comparison, approximately, you find that it's actually that Saturday school that's doing, should we say, a better job, you know. And we suffer from this. Ghana now has a few universities that churches have developed. Now, these churches built these institutions from the sides of those who come to the congregation. But now the universities are so expensive, the same people who gave their money to build it can't access that same institution they built. But you see, again, when we look into religion, because, you know, religion takes specific aspects of indigenous spiritual systems from particularly all over the world and has codified it into a specific, should we say, form. So when you fall out of that form, it's like you're an outsider. You know, it builds a certain gang mentality. You know, you're not in my gang, so I don't have to look after you. I don't have to protect you. You know, but then the very same religion will be telling you that God creates everybody equal and loves everybody equally. So from where does this separation come? You know, but then when we look at the religion as a political institution, because that's what all religions are, they come out of a certain political dynamic, that is political and social dynamic. We can understand why they have this gang mentality as well. You know, so yeah, no, it's a big problem. And so even with our work, you find that we've had so many problems, even from friends, you know, who don't want to know you anymore because they say by speaking to you now, they've been jinxed, or there's some, I don't know, some maybe entity visiting them in the very superstitious stuff. So it's funny that once upon a time, this is labeled as Africans being superstitious and just, you know, stupid. They don't really know what they're saying. To now, the religious people actually being the ones who act superstitiously. Because how can you be jinxed just from talking to me? How does that even make sense? But these people actually believe this very profoundly. They're actually convinced that they are, you know? But then it's funny because once our work started getting into these institutions, you know, me in particular, I don't really mind because I don't generally have a lot of friends anyway, you know, but especially for my wife, you know, because she's quite social, so, you know, I could see that how some of her friends behave did affect her. But now, all of a sudden, the same people who didn't want to speak to her 5 years ago, popping out the woodwork, saying hello this, hello that, and it's, for me, I just said, these are superficial people. Really, you kind of don't want to waste your time with them because the fact that a highly renowned institution is showing appreciation for your work, all of a sudden you are important. That's hypocrisy. Yeah. So, any others?
Brother, can you speak a bit on Ifa, please?
Okay. Yes. Well, Ifa is one of the most well-known of all the traditions. Yes, because it's kept. It has should we say, a stronger legacy, yes, credited to the Yoruba people of Nigeria in the present day. And I think one of the reasons why Ifa has had that impact is the fact that Ifa, of all the systems, is quite systemic. They've managed to, should we say, codify and categorize different aspects of nature. So it makes it easier for people to relate to. You know, and also not forgetting the fact that Ifa, you find as the main, should we say, spiritual systems in places like Trinidad and Tobago, in Cuba, where it's created Lukumi, Santeria, in Brazil, where it's created Candomblé, yes, and also in the US. So Ifa, like any of all the other systems, deals with an appreciation of different natural forces. How do we understand the forces and how they communicate back? You know, so if let's say you've gone to give a libation and then all of a sudden out of the blue you might see thunder flashing across the sky, you can understand why that thunder or lightning happened right at the moment when you perform the act. Because that is a communication. It's like a reciprocal, it's like a cycle. You give and you get. Yes? So it's also interesting that in places like Brazil, people will know about Santeria, yes, but then they won't know about the Congo system known as Palo Mayombe, or even the Anansi system, because there's also an Anansi system that is practiced in a place called Matanzas in Cuba. Because Santeria, in a sense, how would you call it? In a sense, like the gentrified form of Ifa. I remember back in 2007, the Pope visited Cuba because I used to work in a Catholic school at the time, and he actually said, "Yeah, we condone this particular system," but it didn't condone Lukumi, because Lukumi is that aspect that decided that it will not, you know, enslavement is over. We don't need to hide archetypes of nature under Catholic saints anymore. We will keep it. We will keep the African identity. So those systems that have still kept the, should we say, hashing of African understandings with the religious ones, they get an okay. and again, you see, it's the same racial mindset at work. The more European you can make it, the more we'll accept it. And if it's not, it's done. So IFA mainly works through a lot of divination systems. Yes, because through your divination, again, you can identify what we call your Ori. And your Ori is what I mentioned earlier being your divine destiny. So you go for the divination so that the Babalawo, which is the traditional priest, is able to gauge if there are any messages that have come through that you need to be aware of. And you know, the time coming up, should you do this? Or you can also, in a system, the Ori is not something just set. It can change based on people you interact with, yes? How they can also affect your own energy and your spirit. So they might even throw you off course slightly. So the divination becomes like a guidance system to help you to attain that particular role. And again, they can identify what type of force of nature relates to you most, which one might call your personality type. So you know, are you quite fiery? Are you quite strategic? You might be an Ogun. Yes, because Ogun represents that aspect of strategy and, you know, should we say, not necessarily conflict, but fighting to achieve what one wants. Yes, or are you very caring and nurturing? And those aspects might relate you to what we call Yemoja, or the energy that deals with the ocean, because it's what people generally call the mother of fishes. You know, I guess you can see a similar thing with the whole mermaid archetype. Yes, that's who you are. So be able to, through the divinations, identify what type of character set that you have that is most prominent. Now, all the natural forces of nature, you're not just the one, you have all those aspects even within your body. Because I'll give you an example. Ogun, apart from that, is associated with iron. And now iron ore is something that you can dig from the ground and you can turn it into a necklace. You can turn it into a cooking pot. It has a utilitarian purpose. So Ogun doesn't just reflect strategy, or as they generally call it, the god of war. It also gives you indications as to transformation, the type of person that you are, how you can transform yourself into not necessarily another, but to find different aspects of yourself. So that's what Ifa generally is. And as I said, all the others, pretty much they share the same philosophy, but you find that the actual practices in terms of ritual or divination might be slightly different, but it's all geared to the same purpose. So yeah, that's no problem. Thank you too for the question. You know, so hopefully it's been helpful with that explanation. Beautiful. Okay, so any more, please? Otherwise, I have to start calling out people. Folks now. Yes, Sister Nan.
Just a question. When people, in your experience, do you find people struggle to understand the reasoning of seeing the Creator in all things? Do you find that struggle? Do you find people struggle with that more in a sense that they obviously are moving away from Christianity or Islam, but the God concept.
Mm-hmm.
How do you help people, you know, I suppose, link it to or develop that understanding?
Yeah, no, that's I'll try and give some thoughts on it, and then obviously you can let me know if I need to add more to it or not. Yeah, it's that conflict mainly comes from the fact that we're used to this idea of God being a man. Yes, that's what at the very core, from the Abrahamic faith especially, God being a man who lives in a place called heaven. And those who don't fit the criteria to enter heaven end up in a place called hell. And they suffer for an eternity. But this God is a very compassionate God and loves everybody, but he's still going to punish people same way. Very confusing there. However, when you start to hear one of the concepts within African philosophy, that what we call God or the Creator is also reflected in nature, yeah, there is some confusion. But why should there be such a confusion? Because let's think of what nature does for us. We all came here and we ate food, no?
Yeah.
Maybe. Isn't this food what sustains us? It's not necessarily, we might say God, but it's not, we don't have that personal experience with this concept called God. It's the food that sustains us. When you're sick, what do you use to cure yourself? It's the same nature. If we're living as close to as we know the creative abilities of herbs, now we can put some of those compounds into a pill, and then we think it's the pill that is responsible, but ultimately what that pill is made up of comes from natural elements. So let's think of the ideas of what God is. God is supposed to be our provider, our carer, our director, but all these things we find from nature. What do we use to build houses? Again, same thing sourced from nature. So really without nature, and even ultimately, when you die, yes, or the spirit leaves the body, and we put this body in the earth, and we come back 6 months later, what are you going to find? You will find earth. The same nature is what you will find. So you have that physical aspect of yourself still transforms into nature. What we call your spirit, nobody sees, nobody knows. That leaves the body, and the body has no more life. We can't see air, but we can feel it when it blows. So even just using those two analogies, it shouldn't be that far of a stretch to understand why there's that understanding that you are a manifestation of that creative source. I guess what people are used to and comfortable with is the idea that there's something out of themselves that will provide the salvation, because it gives you should we say, exit pass, you know. So if something doesn't happen, well, it's not me, that's what God wanted, you know, without saying, maybe I should have tried hard enough. Maybe I should have had a plan A, B, or C as to how I will attain that objective. Yes? And this is again where, as the brother asked, was good, the divination comes in. Because even you, the individual, can do your own personal divinations. Because the Babalawo or the traditional priest doesn't read things magically, they read your body. You come with your own aura around you that they can read. From things as simple as your very saliva, your sweat, yeah, even how your body smells. This is what they read and give you a reading. So obviously when you also create a consistent practice, you start to be able to see how you can also guide your own self. Yeah. So that's kind of how, at the very simplest form, we can understand how really we should be able to identify that, yes, when we say that you are God, it's not a very far-fetched concept. Because even the physical evidence shows you elements that indeed you are.
And then it's the same thing as well, how you link it to where people feel as though you need to go to church.
Mm-hmm.
Like people, again, on that journey, they still struggle with obviously there's elements of how you can practice individually, but they don't, the collective practice,
yes,
I think is where we're missing in terms of the development of our spirituality. But people automatically again think about a house of God, a place of one specific worship at one specific time. And obviously in this time, even if that's how it starts, you grow and you develop, but there's a bigger disconnect as well alongside the God concept, if that makes sense.
No, it definitely does. It reflects what we're used to, what we become comfortable with. You know, there's this funny story about when the Europeans were in Africa building these lovely churches, and the Africans were sitting back saying, so they're building this place to say that it can contain the Spirit of God, as if God can come and live in this space. Not possible, because it goes against the very idea that God is omnipresent and is everywhere, or can be everywhere at the same time and in all things, which is again one of the very key elements of all these religions. But then at the same time, we have this house where you can only go there to get salvation. So yeah, there's a lot of contradictions, but I think it is useful because when you can be in a space where people can share their experiences, you know, it doesn't, I guess, make you feel too alone in that sense, yeah, because it's useful. This is part of being human. No one person is an island, as they say, so we do need each other, and it will be much more productive, useful, if we can create those spaces for that dialogue and that sharing of experiences, because it makes it, I guess, a lot realer to you when you find people sharing some of the stuff that they experience every day, that you might experience, and then you think, oh God, I'm going crazy, or there's something after me, and you're running to look for I don't know, some priest to sprinkle some holy water or something else or the other over you and exercise this. When you're supposed to look at the experience and say, why did I get this experience? What is it supposed to mean? What is it going to teach me? Yes? And how am I going to develop from that experience? Yeah. So we need to move beyond that fear. Okay. Any others?
But
Comments?
just to make further comment from what you're saying,
Yes.
in relation to, for example, as I mentioned about Jamaica, I've been to Ghana myself.
Okay.
And when we went, like our house was like a church group, the people we went with. And I was really distressed going into the church itself. And we had an upstairs section and a downstairs. And the upstairs part was sort of in building sort of thing. And they had what they call a Sunday school. And I was distressed, like it was a babel of voices, say about 12 different groupings, different age. Some of it was done in the Akan language and that sort of thing. But for me, probably because of my exposure to Rastafari in Jamaica,
Yes.
and also to African retention like Kumina, Etu, around the whole revivalist movement, that sort of thing,
Yes.
where within the community, they use the drum, and they still use some form of the Christian also spirituality,
Yeah.
and they might read from the Bible also, but there are different practices in terms of from what you just accompanying what you are saying.
That's right.
They are seeing it in a different way. They interpret in a different way. The songs that they sing and the spirit that they get into, if you put it like that, they have become possessed.
Yeah.
And with regards to, for example, the Maroons of Jamaica, where those people retain that Africanness within them and carry it through, and we're not content to be brainwashed
That's right.
into following the established order, and say with Rastafari become anti-established in that sense. And when we read of how the slave masters allowed the enslaved people to practice their religion, and in terms of their, say they want to get like a Sunday off of the work, and as a result some of them start to develop their masters' day of worship and all that sort of stuff. So what you are saying is that quite thought-provoking and should be propagated within a wider sphere, because we get so caught up in this whole thing.
Yes.
Because you find it within families too, where some people start to see it differently, behave different, dress different, and family members within a sense would sort of isolate them, only like the black sheep of the family.
That's
and
right.
so forth,
Yeah.
especially if they are not exposed to a certain way. And as you mentioned, like the system will become more recognized.
Yes.
So people, when you start to rise to a certain level now, people will sort of give that more respect.
Yes.
If you really become independent and just start to stride along a certain pathway and carry whatever it is that you're practicing to a level, and people see that you're going with it.
Definitely.
But apart from that, we would find that we would be still sucked into the system which seeks to contain us. And if we ask the question, say, for example, when the enslaved people pray to the God of the master, and then the master pray to that same God, whose prayer is their God going to answer within that sense? Because they say, he who pays the piper calls the tune. That's all that thing.
Yeah.
So it is quite relevant what is being said and done, even within this sphere.
Yeah.
And we have to find ways and means to disseminate such information through our practices and that sort of stuff, because our people are becoming so lost, because they are so caught up in this monetary thing. I mean, we need money, yes,
Of course.
but we put that in front of everything else,
Yes.
and the materialist thing, we get stuck into all the, like say, for our children, for example, they got stuck into all these name brand, this name brand, that, and give their parents so much problem. And some of the parents also need to be much stronger and more oriented to realize, no, you're not having this, you're not having that.
Yeah.
And they should also contribute to those things that they want. Say, for example, like phone bill, that some of these children run up. And the parents have to pay these bills. And the parents have to put down after and say, no, you have to do this, you have to do that, you have to do all of that in order to be able to afford this type of thing. So unless that type of thing is being instituted from the home, carried into the school. I mean, I've been in the school system for over 30 years, right? Now we must find ways and means to educate our children to realize that they can't depend on what is happening in terms of the system. This is not going to liberate them any at all. No, not at all.
No, definitely. Thank you for your thoughts. Definitely, yes.
It was provoking what you said at the beginning of your presentation in terms of some of the key things that fed into African spirituality.
Yes.
For me, being brought up in the church with Christian parents, and obviously your parents wouldn't take you anywhere or do anything that was bad for you, so it must be right.
Yes.
It's been quite difficult to shift that because it's a huge part of me. So as I move away from organised religion, because now I'm reading and finding out for myself, and as I try to denounce anything Christian, because I now believe very little of it. See a lot of the stories in the Bible, in Egyptian mythology, for example. I'm trying to find something, but I actually don't know what it is that I'm looking for. And for some reason and as soon as you say God, there's only one God that I see, because that's the way I've been brought up. So I see the God in heaven with the heaven and the hell, and the Virgin Mary. And so as soon as you say God, my mind is completely switched off. I don't even actually want to hear that word. So I suppose what I'm asking is that where did that word actually come from originally? And of course I believe in spirituality, because when I'm most at peace is actually when I'm on my own somewhere green in nature, and that's when I feel most connected to myself and nature.
Okay.
So I'd just like to kind of expand that bit about God a little bit more, so when I hear that word, it doesn't just, my brain just doesn't shut
Down. Yeah, no, definitely, sister. I couldn't actually tell you with any accurate detail where the word God itself comes from, but the very idea, the very concept that we come from something, it has always been a part of the human experience, because there are mysteries in life that we can never really, I guess, know in every detail. And like a friend of mine said, mainly with the image of Jesus, that the Catholic Church controls, it has a patent on the image of Jesus. Yeah? So each time you mention that, as you can see, there's many people who try and come and say Yeshua, this or Black Jesus, and it's not really getting in there, because that image has been deeply instilled. This is why images are so powerful. So they didn't just make the name, they added an image to it, so that each time you hear it, your mind automatically makes or tries to make that correlation. So then you find yourself in a state of confusion. But as you said, once you're in nature, you find a certain peace that you can't find in that big ass, lovely looking building with all the gold here and the this, that, there, and you can't find. So again, in nature, as you correctly, intuited yourself, you're able to find that there's something here that you can connect with. Because ultimately, as I mentioned earlier, you're not looking for a God out there, because you're looking for is you. And you need to keep looking deeper. You see, we live in a world where everything is outer. So we're looking at the TV, we're looking at the computer screen, now we have our phone. Everything is directed outwards. Not enough. We don't spend enough time bringing ourselves inwards. And this is the work that we need to do. And this work is not just 2 weeks of, I go do this and bam, all of a sudden I'm getting these realizations. No, we have to do it consistently. And we have to also, again, ask for ask guidance from those who, again, you know for a fact. You know you had a grandparent, and you know you had a great-great-grandparent. So there's no point trying to call a name of something that comes from a label that you possibly don't even know the source of, but you do know your lineage. Call out that lineage, and then see what happens. Yes. So that's the most important thing, because often I get asked, I'm not initiated into any system, so I won't know X, Y, Z. No, you don't necessarily need to be initiated into anything for you to begin this journey of self-realization. Yes. Because if you only needed initiation, why is it that we've always had personal and family shrines, very separate to the communal shrine? Yes, because that's for you to find you first before you go and start becoming a member of the crowd, so to speak. Yes? So I'll say take time and be consistent with it. Keep your reading as wide as possible and trust in yourself. ShakaRa, if I can, the young man.
I wanted to add to what Brother was saying in terms of the God thing. I can't remember the etymological root, but I know it's Germanic. Yeah? That's what I can say. I need to jog my memory in terms of exactly what the etymology of it is, but I can see that more from a cultural concept, because obviously, if you know anything about European civilization, it's all based upon Greece and Rome, yeah? And so the God concept that we have today is very Greco-Roman in the sense of the fact that their idea of gods, they had a very violent relationship with their gods, yeah? And so if you look at Greek concepts, like watch a lot of these Greek mythological films, yeah? And the relationship that human beings have with God. And the gods receive their power from the worship of the humans. And so if the humans don't worship them, the gods will punish, yeah, human beings. And that's the relationship they have with God, if that makes sense. And so it's a very Zeus oriented, even the concept of Jesus comes from Zeus and that kind of thing, and how those gods related to us. Now I think that for me, because I'm like you, this word God, I have a problem with it, right? I don't like it, but I use it sometimes simply for communication purposes, yeah? At the same time, if I say God, and I say, one concept comes in my head. If I say Oludumare, a different concept comes in my head completely, because it's a different language. And also, I think we'll find that if we were to translate, because sometimes we say that, we use an African word and we say it means God. But if we were to look at it closer, it actually doesn't necessarily mean God. Yeah. So, for example, Mwari in the Shona means he, she, that is. Yeah. It means all in all. Yeah. I forgot the breakdown of Oludumare, but it relates to the masculine and feminine aspects of the Creator. You know what I'm saying? So you'll find these definitions. There's another word, I can't remember what it is or what language, but it means great spirit, yeah? So great as in quantity and quality, great as in everything, yeah? The great spirit is everything, all right? And so you find different conceptualities that even just using those words sometimes will give a different psychology in the mind in terms of what we're actually talking about. I feel something different when I use an African word, any language for the Creator, than when I use something that is European, if that makes sense. Yeah. So that's
yeah, no, of course, feel free. This is an open creative space, and ShakaRa, as you know, often now people try and come at it like, oh, I'm the only one who knows. And as I said, no, because remember, each person here has their own realization to do. And it's that ultimate collective realization that creates this consciousness that we really might call him as term God, or as I generally tend to use the word creator, but sometimes to even fit that in a sentence, yeah, it jigs your sentence around. So for, as you said, ease of communication sometimes, and also sometimes to let people understand what you're talking about, I will say God, but then I make sure I'm always very clear that it's a concept. It's not a man sitting anywhere else who's going to give you favor or this and that. It's just an idea trying to explain how we come into being. Yes, so again, one of the key African concepts is, or the oldest documented, is that what we call the Creator God is a female, because it's dealing with the idea of coming into being. And ancient Kemethians represented it with a pregnant hippopotamus called Ta'et, because it wasn't about God being a hippopotamus. Notice again, that's a nature concept that is being reflected onto, but it's the baby coming out. How do you create? And again, we're all creators here. Yes, everything we're sitting on using first came from where? Somewhere in your mind. It didn't exist, but it was here first, and then you managed to make it into its physical form. So again, you see, when we really look deeper into these conversations we have, we'll find that most of our answers is actually very obvious. But because we've been programmed to think in a particular way, going back to that Greco-Roman categorizations, then we find ourselves, well, we think we're baffled, but we're not really. It's the realization of what we're coming into that's what scares us. Because we're going into a place where we have to become self-responsible. We have to be responsible for self. We can't just explain our way and say, oh, that was what God would have wanted. So if it didn't happen, then that's fine. You know, who knows better than God or whatever else. These simplistic explanations that we find religious people give, no. You need to be responsible for yourself, for your life, all the things you're doing within it, and what you can realize or create. Yes, so we'll take the young man there. Sorry, I know I skipped you there the other time. Would you like to make your contribution, ask your question? Go on. You can come and use the mic if you want.
Give a round of applause. Give a round of applause.
You want to tell mommy and then mommy can ask on your behalf? Love it. Mommy, did you get anything for us to work with? Oh. Alright, I'll tell you what you can do is, when I finish the presentation, you can come and ask me later, okay? I'll be sitting there, we can have a one-to-one. How about that? Yes? No, good. And again, sister, just to add back to that, the brother ShakaRa said, when you use the various African names, you find that because when we say God, it doesn't really tell us anything about this idea. But as he said, you know, Volodymyr, we know it's an androgynous. When you come into that can, we have various names of referring to the creator. So you might have Onyankopon or Twediampon Kwame, which means the all-powerful, all-strong. So again, we find this idea of God being something that gives us strength. Yeah, again, it's not just a man, it's something that gives us strength. So when we look at, or within the African linguistics themselves, God is not a personification. It's an archetype. It's an idea, yes, that we can use to work with ourselves in terms of informing ourselves. Or they might say Boribori, which means something that creates. Again, yeah, it manifests something. But in the same vein, you never call on Onyankopon without calling on Asasiya, which is Mother Earth. So there's also the idea of God being a balance. There's a masculine element and there's a feminine element. None of us would be here if we didn't have these two elements together.
Yes.
So again, when we look at the conceptions of the creator within African spirituality, there's a lot that becomes very clear about our very selves, and which is why I said, as its core essence, it's not about going to do some juju for money and becoming this wealthy person to flaunt. It's about realizing yourself. Yes. So.
Yeah. All right. That was part one of the presentation. Can we give that brother Dalian a round of applause, please? We'll be back in the second half.